My next guest actually ran for a House seat here in California in the 90s. He also served in the Reagan administration, has an undergraduate degree in political science and economics from University of Dallas, law degree from University of Chicago, former dean at Chapman University, where he still serves as a professor. Please welcome back to the program, Professor John Eastman. Professor, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Oh, Larry, it's always a pleasure to be on your show and to be with the sage of South Central Los Angeles.
Well, thank you, Professor. How does this end?
Well, look, so here's the problem. We're all focused on the counts. And it looks like President Trump may lose Georgia to Joe Biden because of the count coming out of Atlanta, and then he may well lose Pennsylvania because of the count coming out of Philadelphia. I think he's going to pick up Arizona, but he may well lose Nevada out of the count coming out of Clark County. But the problem is the significant trigger event was not the count, but the verification of which ballots were legitimately cast in order to be counted. And Republicans in a lot of those jurisdictions were blocked out of the verification process, the signature verification process, the legitimacy of the absentee ballots that have been collected and harvested, and oftentimes in violation of state law. But once that threshold decision had been done and the ballot is separated from the envelope that allowed you to verify the legitimacy of the ballot, then you can't unravel the question of whether those votes were, which votes were illegitimate and cast or who they were cast for. And so unless the court would be willing to step in Pennsylvania and say, because we can't determine, we know that there were illegitimate votes cast, but we can't determine which way they went, and therefore we can't invalidate the election. Unless the court's willing to invalidate the election, as it did 2 years ago in North Carolina when there was illegal ballot harvesting that was conducted, then you're going to have to live with the results. And it looks like a pervasive fraud will have then prevailed in the state. And by pervasive fraud, I mean acting illegally, contrary to state law. So in Pennsylvania, they delivered ballots to every registered voter in violation of state law. They've accepted those ballots past the election day in violation of state law because of a Democrat-controlled state Supreme Court that ordered that determination be extended. These violations of state law violate both state law and also federal law under the National Voter Registration Act, and yet we seem to be living with them and then kind of waiting on bated breath for the results of the illegitimately determined count rather than looking at illegitimacy of the ballots that were cast in the first place.
So you believe that when all the challenges, let's just stick to Pennsylvania for a moment, when all the legal challenges are exhausted, the U.S. Supreme Court will not likely even pick up the case?
I think that's right. I think by the time all the absentee ballots are cast in Pennsylvania, I think it's very likely that Biden surpasses Trump's lead on Election Day by as much as 880 or 200,000 votes, and I don't think the Supreme Court will overturn that, even though there's serious questions about the legality of the votes that were cast to skew those Election Day results in the different direction.
I'm talking with Professor John Eastman of Chapman University. Professor, assume for a moment that the U.S. Supreme Court stepped in and did overturn the results in Pennsylvania. What happens then? Do they do another election?
Well, so, yeah, you could do another election. That's what happened in North Carolina 2 years ago. The Republican candidate illegally harvested ballots. So absentee ballots in North Carolina at the time could only be returned by an immediate family member. And yet he had his own campaign staff returning thousands of absentee ballots. Once they're returned and separated from the original envelope, you can't decipher which ballot, which way those votes were gone. And so the courts ordered a new election. The Supreme Court could do that in Pennsylvania, but I just don't think it will. And that means the illegalities that occurred will then end up prevailing without any remedy.
Professor, are you saying that you don't think they're going to intervene in part because the election is going to be insufficiently close so that even if you were to argue that these ballots that people are questioning should not have been counted, it would not have affected the outcome of the election? In other words, Joe Biden is taking Pennsylvania by so many votes, this really wouldn't matter.
Well, so the easy issue is the segregated votes that Justice Alito got a concession out of the Pennsylvania Attorney General during the argument, brief argument last week, of those that are delivered after Election Day, contrary to Pennsylvania state law. Those votes would be segregated, and you could easily say we can't count those votes because it would violate state law. But I think those are going to be relatively small in number to the overall total. The bigger problem is the violation of state law, where the governor ordered the distribution of absentee ballots to every voter in the state, even those that didn't ask for them. And as a result of that, lots of ballots out there floating for potentially fraudulent redistribution back to the county clerks. I don't think that the Supreme Court is going to be able to have a definitive answer on how those ballots affected the election to overturn the election, even though they should. But I think that's where the real rub is going to come. The easy one is they're going to say the numbers that we're talking about would not affect the election. But the bigger problem, I think they're going to not address.
My guest is Professor John Eastman. Professor, bottom line is the Supreme Court is very, very reluctant to get involved in what they consider to be political questions at all.
Well, they are, and John Roberts is leading the charge on that. The question is, what does Brett Kavanaugh do? I think you've got Justice Alito and Gorsuch and Thomas, who already indicate serious concern about these kind of last-minute changes to the election rules. The question, and I think the new Justice Amy Coney Barrett will probably be with them. That's 4 votes. The real question is where Justice Kavanaugh comes down, and whether he joins with Justice Roberts and the liberals, as Roberts did on the initial Pennsylvania challenge, or whether we try to uphold the integrity of the ballot against what has become fairly pervasive fraud that people have been getting away with for decades, and now all of a sudden the election's close enough where it matters, and it's being challenged on whether they're going to overturn that. So I'll give you one example. Nursing homes filled with people who are incapacitated and not able to request an absentee ballot on their own or to cast a ballot, nevertheless are having ballots vote for them by the social services director of the nursing home or what have you. Those ballots are illegitimately cast and illegally cast and ought to be discounted. That's been going on for decades, a systematic and comprehensive voter fraud, and yet nobody has challenged it. I think the Trump team is willing to challenge it. The question is whether the courts are going to give them any traction for those challenges.
My guest is Professor John Eastman. Professor, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we've been talking about Pennsylvania. I want to know which is the state that most worries you, and what about Michigan? What about Arizona? What about Georgia? 888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. Professor John Eastman, Larry Elder, do not leave town.